Appreciate it.
Thanks.
For more on this, I'd like to bring in Republican Congressman from Illinois, Adam Kinzinger. He sits on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, you heard the president today. As I said earlier, he was very talkative. Have you been satisfied with the way that the White House, and in particular President Trump, has responded to the disappearance of Khashoggi so far?
Well, you know, in some of the way the president speaks sometimes, I wouldn't say exactly like he does. But I think the president has to, look, you have some people that are like leaping to this conclusion of we need to just basically excommunicate Saudi Arabia from the entire world. We need to be cautious about this. This is an egregious thing that happened. And it looks like all the evidence is pointing to, in fact, that he was tortured and dismembered to death. And that's an awful, awful thing. But we also have to understand that in the world of international relations, caution but firmness is important. And I think the president today saying things like, you know, this will be severe, I think we have to take him at his word. There's a lot of people that kind of jump to the conclusion of blaming President Trump somehow for what's going on. Look, this was the Saudis in Turkey, so we are a side partner to what's going on, and so we'll figure out what the appropriate response is at the right time.
Sure, but you know that the president first said, look, this guy's not even a citizen, sort of trying to imply he's not, this isn't our problem. I take issue with that a little bit. But also, what do you make of the fact that Trump says he hasn't even spoken with King Mohammed of Saudi Arabia yet?
Well, I mean, if it's true, he should. But we're also, you know, I understand trying to get all this information together. And I trust I know Mike Pompeo well. And if he said he and the president haven't seen it yet, necessarily because they don't want to see it. It's maybe the Turks haven't released this evidence yet. They've said, here's what we have, maybe here's a transcript, but it's not like they can just email the stuff over to their Gmail account and show them what they have. There's a process here. So, you know, I think we have to understand, for whatever reason, sometimes in partisan lines, sometimes in people's foreign policy view lines, in the United States, it seems like folks are falling kind of along sympathy towards Shia or sympathy towards Sunni now, which is unfortunate. We need to just basically look and say, what is the right way for us to respond to uphold human rights, but understand the greatest human rights violations that are occurring in the Middle East right now is not from Saudi Arabia. It's by barrel bombing in Syria and the destruction of 50,000 children and 500,000 Syrians, supported by the Russians, Iranians, and of course Assad. Yeah,
and look, I'm gonna talk to a Democrat colleague of yours in the next block to push him on the idea that we should just sort of throw this relationship away and risk some of the security in the region that you just mentioned. But a few of your colleagues in the Senate, or not your colleagues, but a few senators sent a letter to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo this week raising concerns about the high number of civilian casualties in the Yemen-Saudi Arabia skirmish. On the other hand, Rand Paul is suggesting cutting off military aid to Saudi Arabia. Which of these kind of responses do you think is getting it right, if any of them?
Well, I think questioning the way the war in Yemen's being waged is always a good thing to do. We want the least civilian casualties as possible. But let me just address Rand Paul for a moment. I mean, he wanted us out of basically all world affairs from the beginning since he ever came to the Senate. It's a legitimate point of view. I'm not going to. I mean, he's got a legitimate kind of libertarian point of view on that. But to pretend like this is the impetus that now changed his mind on Saudi Arabia, when at the same time he keeps people like the administration that we should have a better relationship with Russia, who, by the way, poisoned people in NATO territory, in the United Kingdom, using weapons of mass destruction, as well as basically hid the fact that there were still chemical weapons in Syria. It's really, you know, we can look at this and say there's atrocities all over the place, but to somehow put a moral equivalency and yet turn your back on what's going on in Syria and say the Russians are great, it just can't happen.
So yesterday, Turkey released Pastor Brunson, and Trump insists, without any kind of deal, Turkish President Erdogan tried to broker a ceasefire in Syria, and he's promised to investigate Khashoggi's disappearance. Do you think we're seeing a softening of Erdogan, or is this sort of a PR front?
I actually do think there's a softening going on. And think about Erdogan's actually pretty interesting because, you know, he shoots down Russian MiGs, and then he's got a close relationship with Russia. Now he's trying to, I think, repair the relationship with the United States. Turkey will always take the side of who has momentum. And right now, under this president, you know, whether you agree or disagree, I'm going to tell you, the momentum in the Middle East is back with the United States of America. And you look at the sanctions the president put on Turkey, which, a year ago was unthinkable. They're a NATO ally. I think Turkey is desperate for some relief. I'm glad they let this pastor that never should have been detained go, and hopefully this is a new era in our relationship. I've been to Turkey as a military pilot. It's a very important location.
And hopefully some of the other prisoners that are still being held there are coming out soon as well. Saudi Arabia is hosting the Future Investment Initiative later this month. It's an important economic summit. Secretary of the Treasury Steve Mnuchin has already stated that he still plans on attending the summit as others have pulled out. What do you think? Should he withdraw or should he go?
Well, if I was him, I wouldn't go. I think it sends a strong message. Yeah. Saudi Arabia, like it or not, is going to continue to be an economic powerhouse. But I think this can be part of a broader response to what happened. I wouldn't be surprised to see this be part of a broader response to what happened. I think it's a moment where we can say, look, we're gonna make it clear that murdering and dismembering journalists is not something we stand for. And while we may not cut off relations with you totally, there is going to be a cost, and this is a little piece of probably a broader package of hurt for Saudi Arabia.
Congressman Adam Kinzinger, thank you so much.
You bet. See ya.